You're doing it right now. Even as you read these words, some part of you is preparing a defense, rehearsing your justifications, cataloging your reasons. That voice in your head that immediately activates when someone questions you, challenges you, or accuses you of something, that desperate, scrambling little voice, is the very mechanism that keeps you powerless. It's the reflex of a slave, and you perform it so automatically, so reflexively, that you don't even realize you're doing it. Someone criticizes your work, and before they've finished their sentence, you're already explaining the circumstances. Someone questions your decision, and you're immediately offering your reasoning like a defendant on trial. Someone insults you, and you cannot help but correct the record, set the story straight, make sure they understand the real situation. You think you're being reasonable. You think you're being mature. You think you're standing up for yourself. You're not. You're bleeding power from a wound you don't even know you have. Every word of self-defense is a confession of guilt. Every explanation is an admission that their judgment matters. Every justification is you kneeling before a throne you didn't realize you'd granted them. The moment you defend yourself, you have already lost. This isn't what they taught you. Society raised you to believe that defending yourself is strength, that letting accusations stand uncorrected is weakness, that silence in the face of criticism is cowardice. They conditioned you to think that your reputation depends on your ability to explain, justify, and correct misperceptions. They trained you to be reactive, to live in perpetual response mode, jumping to attention every time someone pulls your strings. And you've been dancing to that tune your entire life, haven't you? Every time someone misunderstood your intentions, you rushed to clarify. Every time someone questioned your competence, you listed your credentials. Every time someone challenged your character, you presented evidence of your virtue. Like a desperate merchant in the marketplace, constantly advertising your wares to anyone who passes by. You thought you were maintaining your dignity. You were actually auctioning it off to the lowest bidder. Right from where you are watching, so I can send you special shout-out in the next video. Today's shout-out goes to Ramin Muradov from Canada. Niccolo Machiavelli understood something that most people spend their entire lives never grasping. Power and perception operate according to laws that have nothing to do with fairness, truth, or justice. The prince doesn't concern itself with what's right, it concerns itself with what's effective. And one of the most counterintuitive truths in that cold manual of power is this: the powerful never explain themselves. They don't defend. They don't justify. They don't scramble to correct misperceptions. Not because they're arrogant, but because they understand a principle that escapes the masses. The moment you defend yourself, you accept the frame that you need defending. You grant your accuser the position of judge. You transform their opinion into a verdict you must overturn. You take what should be irrelevant noise and elevate it into legitimate criticism that demands your response. In that single reflexive act of self-defense, you hand them your power. Think about how this mechanism actually operates. Someone says something about you. True or false doesn't matter for this analysis. In the space between their words and your response, there's a moment of pure potential. In that moment, you have choices, but you've been so conditioned, so thoroughly trained, that you don't even see the choices anymore. You only see one path: defend, explain, correct. And so you do. You offer your counter-narrative, you present your evidence, you explain the context they're missing. And what happens? You've now entered into negotiation with someone who had no power over you until you gave it to them. You've transformed an opinion into an accusation that requires a defense. You've taken a statement that should have fallen into irrelevance and instead given it enough energy to live and breathe and demand more from you. Worse, you've revealed that you care what they think. You've shown that their words have the power to make you react. And in the economy of power, that reactivity is currency. The person who reacts is always subordinate to the person who provoked the reaction. The masses live their entire lives in this reactive state. Someone criticizes them at work, and they spend the next hour drafting the perfect response email. Someone posts something unflattering about them online, and they can't rest until they've corrected the record. Someone questions their decisions, and they compulsively explain their reasoning, as if the mere act of explaining will somehow force understanding and acceptance. They are perpetually on trial, perpetually defending themselves before judges they never appointed, in courtrooms that exist only in their own minds, and they wonder why they feel powerless. They wonder why people don't respect them. They wonder why, despite all their defending, despite all their explaining, despite all their justifying, the accusations keep coming and the respect keeps eroding. They don't understand that the defending is the problem. The explanation is the weakness. The justification is the wound through which their power hemorrhages. Here's what society won't tell you because society needs you weak and manageable. Most accusations don't require a response because most accusations aren't actually about truth. They're about testing. They're about probing for weakness. They're about finding out whether you can be made to dance on command. When someone accuses you of something, when someone criticizes you, when someone questions you, they're not necessarily seeking truth or understanding. They're seeking information about you. They're trying to determine whether you're the kind of person who can be controlled through social pressure, whether you're the kind of person who needs approval, whether you're the kind of person who will scramble to justify themselves when challenged, and every time you defend yourself, you answer that question definitively. Yes, I can be controlled. Yes, I need your approval. Yes, I will scramble. You think you're correcting a misperception. You're actually failing a test you didn't know you were taking. Machiavelli observed the courts of power and noticed something the powerless never see. The prince doesn't concern himself with what every courtier thinks of him. The prince doesn't rush to correct every rumor. The prince doesn't defend himself against every accusation. Why? Because the prince understands that power creates its own truth. When you occupy a position of genuine power, people interpret your actions through that lens regardless of what you say. When you lack power, no amount of explaining will change their interpretation. Your defense doesn't alter perception, it confirms your position outside the realm of power. The powerful are granted the benefit of the doubt. Their silences are interpreted as confidence. Their lack of explanation is seen as sovereignty. The powerless are denied that benefit. Their silences are seen as guilt. But here's the paradox. Their explanations are also seen as guilt, because only the guilty feel compelled to explain. This is the trap you're in. You think defending yourself is how you maintain your reputation. But your reputation isn't built on what you say about yourself. It's built on what others perceive about your relationship to power. And nothing signals powerlessness more clearly than the compulsive need to defend, explain, and justify. You've been fighting the wrong battle. You've been trying to win through better arguments, better explanations, better justifications. But the battlefield isn't logical, it's psychological. The person who can remain unmoved by accusations appears more powerful than the person who scrambles to refute them, regardless of who's technically correct. Truth is subordinate to frame. Facts are subordinate to positioning. And the positioning game is won not by those who defend themselves most eloquently, but by those who don't feel the need to defend themselves at all. Consider the architecture of power in any domain. The CEO doesn't defend herself to middle management. The judge doesn't explain his rulings to the defendant. The master doesn't justify his decisions to the apprentice. Not because they're cruel or arrogant, but because the relationship itself precludes the need for defense. Defense implies equality or subordination. The superior simply states. The inferior explains. When you defend yourself, you're unconsciously accepting a subordinate position, even if the person challenging you has no legitimate authority over you. You're granting them judicial power. You're appearing before their bench. You're accepting that their opinion constitutes a charge to which you must respond. This happens 1,000 times in small interactions throughout your life, and each time you reinforce the pattern. Each time you train yourself and others that you can be made to justify yourself. Each time you leak power. The Machiavellian understanding operates on a different frequency entirely. It recognizes that power isn't defended, it's demonstrated, and the ultimate demonstration of power is the ability to let accusations, criticisms, and misperceptions exist without feeling compelled to address them. This sounds like passivity. It's the opposite. It's the highest form of aggression because it refuses to play a game you didn't consent to. When someone accuses you of something and you simply don't address it, you've done something psychologically devastating to them. You've treated their opinion as irrelevant. You've demonstrated that their judgment doesn't constitute a tribunal you recognize. You've shown that their attempt to make you dance failed. And this, more than any eloquent defense, communicates power. Because power is fundamentally about whose frame controls the interaction. When you defend, they control the frame. When you ignore, you control the frame. When you don't even acknowledge that a defense is necessary, you've transcended the frame entirely. But here's where it gets deeper, where the true Machiavellian principle emerges. This isn't about pretending accusations don't hurt you. This isn't about suppressing your reactive instinct and gritting your teeth while staying silent. That's just defense in another form, internalized and unexpressed, but still operating according to the same powerless logic. The true principle is this: you must become genuinely indifferent to accusations because you must become genuinely sovereign over your own judgment of yourself. The reason you feel compelled to defend yourself is that some part of you believes the accuser might be right. Some part of you believes their judgment is legitimate. Some part of you has outsourced your self-evaluation to the court of public opinion, and until you reclaim that sovereignty, until you become the sole legitimate judge of yourself, you will always be in the defensive crouch. You will always be a subject seeking approval from your betters. This is the transformation that Machiavelli points toward, but that most readers miss because they're looking for tactics instead of understanding the deeper psychology. The prince doesn't defend himself, not because he's playing a strategic game, but because he genuinely doesn't recognize any authority higher than his own judgment. He has internalized sovereignty. When someone accuses him of cruelty, he doesn't defend himself as kind because he doesn't accept the frame that kindness is the measure of a prince. When someone questions his methods, he doesn't justify them according to their values because he doesn't subordinate his judgment to theirs. He has become the standard. And this isn't arrogance. It's the natural state of the sovereign individual. You're supposed to be the sovereign of your own existence. Instead, you've spent your life as a subject of other people's courts, other people's judgments, other people's frames. Every defense you offer is a petition to that court. Every explanation is a plea for understanding from judges whose authority you've granted but never examined. Every justification is you trying to prove you deserve their approval, their respect, their positive judgment. And you'll never get it through defending yourself, because the act of defending yourself is precisely what proves you're not worthy of it. The respect you seek comes from power, not from explanation. The approval you want comes from demonstrated sovereignty, not from pleading your case. The reputation you're trying to protect through constant defense is actually being destroyed by the defending itself. You're stuck in a loop that can't be solved from within the loop. You're trying to win a game where the rules guarantee that anyone who plays has already lost. Breaking this pattern requires something most people aren't willing to do. It requires you to become comfortable with being misunderstood. It requires you to accept that some people will believe false things about you, and you will do nothing to correct them. It requires you to tolerate the psychological discomfort of letting accusations stand without rebuttal. It requires you to allow your reputation to be whatever it's going to be in other people's minds while you focus your energy on demonstrating power through your actions rather than defending your character through your words. This is painful. The urge to defend is one of the most primal urges humans have. It's connected to your survival instinct, to your social instinct, to your deep need for acceptance and belonging. Overriding it feels like dying. It feels like letting an essential part of yourself be killed without fighting back. Good, that part needs to die. That's the weak part. That's the part that keeps you in chains. The weak defend themselves constantly because they need external validation to know they're okay. They need other people to understand, to agree, to approve. Their sense of self is constructed from the reflected judgments of others. So when those judgments are negative, their entire identity is threatened. Of course they defend. They're defending their psychological existence. The sovereign constructs his sense of self from his own judgment. He knows who he is. He knows what he's done and why. He knows his own character. Other people's opinions are interesting data points, perhaps, but they're not definitional. They don't constitute his reality. So when accusations come, when criticism arrives, when people misunderstand him, he's not threatened because nothing important is at stake. His self-knowledge doesn't depend on their perception. His identity doesn't require their approval. He can let their opinions exist in their minds without them creating any obligation in his life. This is the power flip that Machiavelli understood. The moment you stop defending yourself is the moment you stop being defensible in the old sense and start becoming something else entirely. You become opaque, mysterious, unpredictable. People can't manipulate you through social pressure anymore because you've disconnected from the mechanism that made manipulation possible. You've cut the strings. They can accuse you, criticize you, question you all they want, but they can't make you dance. And when people realize they can't make you react, when they realize you simply don't care what they think, their entire relationship to you changes. Some will hate you for it because you've refused to submit to their judgment. Good. You don't want respect from people who can only respect those they can control. Others will be magnetized to you precisely because you've demonstrated the sovereignty they secretly crave but don't have the courage to claim. Power recognizes power. Strength respects strength. And nothing signals strength more clearly than the ability to let weakness disguised as strength shout itself hoarse while you remain unmoved. Practically, this manifests in every interaction you have. Someone at work questions your competence in a meeting. The old you launches into an explanation of your qualifications, your thought process, your reasons. The sovereign you simply looks at them and continues with what you were saying, or perhaps doesn't even acknowledge the question at all. You've treated it as the irrelevance it is. Someone online posts something critical about you. The old you composes a response, gathering evidence, crafting arguments, posting a rebuttal. The sovereign you doesn't even see it, because you've stopped monitoring what people say about you in spaces you don't control. Someone in your personal life accuses you of some moral failing. The old you explains your actions, justifies your decisions, tries to make them understand. The sovereign you says, "You're entitled to your opinion," and moves on with your life, uninterested in whether they ever understand or not. This sounds harsh until you realize it's actually the most respectful thing you can do. When you compulsively defend yourself, you're treating other people like their opinions are so fragile they need to be managed. You're treating them like children whose feelings must be carefully handled. You're treating yourself like a product that needs constant advertising. The sovereign approach respects both yourself and others enough to let everyone be responsible for their own judgments. You're responsible for your actions and your character. They're responsible for what they make of it. You don't need to convince them. You don't need to control their perception. You don't need their approval. And ironically, this is when you actually start getting something like genuine respect, because respect can only flow toward someone who doesn't need it. But the deeper level of this principle goes beyond social dynamics into the realm of self-creation. Every time you defend yourself, you're reinforcing an identity based on past actions and external judgments. You're looking backward, trying to justify who you were. The sovereign looks forward, focused on who he's becoming. He doesn't defend his past because he's not his past. He's not a collection of actions that need justification. He's a will in motion, constantly creating himself anew. Accusations about his past are literally irrelevant because he's not that person anymore. He's been killing that person and replacing him every day through disciplined self-transformation. How can you defend a self that you're actively destroying? How can you justify actions taken by someone you've transcended? The obsession with defense is an obsession with preservation. The obsession with preservation is fear of transformation, and fear of transformation is death disguised as life. This is why most people never become powerful. They're so busy defending who they think they are that they can't become who they need to be. They're so invested in their current reputation that they can't take the risks necessary for greatness. They're so concerned with what people think that they can't do what power requires. The sovereign understands that becoming powerful means being willing to let your old self die, which means letting accusations against that old self simply be undefended, because you're not defending a corpse. You're not justifying a ghost. You're building something new, and the new doesn't require the approval of those who were comfortable with the old. The Stoics understood this from a different angle but arrived at the same truth. Epictetus taught that only your own judgments can harm you, not the judgments of others. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the opinion of the many is just noise. They understood that the compulsive need to defend yourself from external judgments is slavery. It's granting others dominion over your inner citadel. The Stoic withdraws consent from that dominion. He fortifies his inner judgment and treats external judgment as indifferent. Machiavelli simply adds the strategic dimension. This inner sovereignty isn't just about peace of mind. It's the foundation of external power. When you're genuinely free from the need for approval, people sense it, and they respond to it. Not with love, necessarily, but with respect, with wariness, with the particular kind of regard reserved for those who can't be controlled through normal social mechanisms. You're standing at a choice point right now, though you probably don't realize it. You can continue living as you have been, defending yourself, explaining yourself, justifying yourself to anyone who questions you. It's the easier path in the short term. It's what everyone else does. It's what society expects. You'll maintain your current relationships. You'll avoid the discomfort of being misunderstood. You'll keep the illusion of control that comes from managing your reputation through constant communication. But you'll stay exactly where you are. You'll remain reactive, subordinate, perpetually on trial before judges you never appointed. You'll leak power in every interaction. You'll wonder why people don't respect you despite your intelligence, your competence, your accomplishments. You'll spend your entire life in the defensive crouch, never realizing that the crouch itself is the problem. Or you can begin the difficult work of reclaiming sovereignty. You can start training yourself to not defend, not to explain unless explanation serves your purposes, not to justify yourself to those who have no legitimate authority over you. You can practice letting accusations stand. You can develop tolerance for being misunderstood. You can build the internal strength required to have people think false things about you without it threatening your sense of self. This is painful. This is lonely. When you stop defending yourself, some people will interpret your silence as guilt. Some relationships will end because they were based on you being manageable. Some opportunities will close because people prefer those they can control through social pressure. Good. These are all filtering mechanisms removing what was never meant for you anyway. The relationships worth having will deepen. The respect worth earning will come. The opportunities aligned with power will appear. But you have to be willing to pay the price of transition. The price is this. You must become someone who genuinely doesn't need to be understood by everyone. Someone who doesn't require approval to know his own worth. Someone who can carry secrets, carry accusations, carry misperceptions without feeling compelled to correct them. You must become opaque where you were transparent, silent where you were explanatory, sovereign where you were subordinate. This isn't about becoming cold or inhuman. It's about becoming truly human, truly individuated, truly yourself, rather than a collection of reactions to other people's judgments. The person who must defend himself is not yet free. The person who must explain himself is not yet sovereign. The person who must justify himself is not yet powerful. These are stages you pass through on the way to something higher. Machiavelli's secret isn't really a secret at all. It's hidden in plain sight throughout the prince, visible to anyone with eyes to see it. The powerful don't play the same game as the powerless. They don't operate according to the same rules. They don't accept the same frames. And one of the clearest markers of this difference is that the powerful don't defend themselves against the powerless, not because they're better or more virtuous, but because they recognize that defending yourself against someone grants them power over you. They recognize that explanation implies subordination. They recognize that justification implies doubt. So they don't do it. They simply act and let their actions speak. They simply are and let their being be whatever it is. They don't need your understanding. They don't require your approval. They're not asking permission. They're not making excuses. They're exercising power, which is the only real defense anyone ever has. You'll know you're making progress on this path when accusations start bothering you less, when criticism loses its sting, when misunderstandings become merely interesting rather than threatening, when someone questions you and you feel no urge to explain, when someone insults you and you feel no need to correct them, when someone doubts you and you feel no compulsion to prove them wrong. These aren't signs that you've become cold. They're signs that you've become free. Free from the prison of other people's judgments. Free from the courtroom that exists in your own mind. Free to act according to your own assessment of what's right and necessary rather than constantly checking whether others approve. This freedom is power. This freedom is what Machiavelli was pointing toward. This freedom is what separates the prince from the subject. But understand something clearly. This isn't permission to never explain yourself. This isn't a license to be mysterious for mystery's sake or to refuse accountability in domains where you've actually accepted authority. If you work for someone, you owe them explanation within the scope of that relationship. If you've made commitments, you owe fulfillment or genuine communication about changes. The principle isn't about refusing all explanation universally. It's about not being compulsively driven to defend and explain yourself to those who have no legitimate claim to such defense. It's about choosing consciously where you will engage and where you won't, based on your own assessment of what serves your purposes, not based on the psychological compulsion to make everyone understand and approve. The sovereign explains when explanation serves his aims. The subject explains when explanation is demanded of him. The difference is locus of control. Most people will never do this. They'll read these words and feel the truth in them, but they'll go back to defending themselves the next time they're challenged because the pattern is too deep, too automatic, too connected to their sense of survival. They'll know intellectually that defending themselves is weakness, but they'll do it anyway because knowing isn't the same as being. Transformation requires more than understanding. It requires practice. It requires repeatedly catching yourself in the act of defending and stopping. It requires sitting with the discomfort of being misunderstood. It requires rewiring neural pathways built over decades. It requires you to become a different person, which is the hardest work there is. Most people would rather stay weak and comfortable than become strong through discomfort. This is why most people stay powerless despite knowing, on some level, what power would require. If you're still reading this, though, some part of you is different. Some part of you recognized yourself in the mirror this holds up. Some part of you is tired of defending, explaining, justifying. Some part of you knows you were meant for sovereignty, but you've been living as a subject. The question is whether that part is strong enough to actually change, or whether it's just strong enough to recognize the problem before submitting to it again. The path forward is clear but narrow. Stop defending yourself when doing so serves no purpose except managing other people's perceptions. Start building your life on the foundation of your own judgment rather than the reflected appraisals of others. Begin cultivating genuine indifference to accusations by building genuine self-knowledge. Practice letting things be misunderstood. Train yourself to be opaque. Kill the part of you that needs to be understood by everyone. Replace it with something harder, colder, more sovereign. This is the work. This is the path. This is what power requires. Not better arguments, not more clever defenses, not more thorough explanations, but the fundamental transformation from someone who lives in reaction to someone who lives in action, from someone who needs approval to someone who generates his own validation, from someone who's on trial to someone who's beyond judgment. Machiavelli mapped the territory. The Stoics provided the inner fortification. But you have to walk the path yourself. No one can do it for you. No one can defend you into sovereignty. You have to stop defending yourself and start being yourself in such a full, complete, and total way that the question of defense becomes absurd. You have to become someone who's not on trial because you've never accepted the jurisdiction of the court. This journey isn't for everyone. It requires you to tolerate being misunderstood, even hated. It requires you to accept that your reputation will be whatever people decide it is, and you will do nothing to control it beyond living according to your own standards. It requires you to let go of the desperate need for everyone to know the truth about you. It requires you to become comfortable with the fact that most people will never understand you, and this is not only acceptable, but necessary. The sovereign doesn't belong to the masses. He doesn't require their understanding. He exists on a different plane, operating according to principles they don't recognize. And this separation is the source of his power. When you stop trying to make everyone understand you, when you stop defending yourself against every misperception, when you stop explaining yourself to those who have no right to such explanation, you reclaim the power you've been bleeding your entire life. The choice is yours, and it always has been. You can continue in the pattern of defense, explanation, and justification, remaining forever reactive, forever subordinate, forever weak. Or you can begin the painful work of becoming sovereign, accepting that this path requires you to be comfortable with being misunderstood, accepting that some will interpret your silence as admission, accepting that the transition will cost you relationships and opportunities that were never meant for who you're becoming anyway. The sovereign path is lonelier, it's harder, it's more painful in the short term, but it's the only path that leads to genuine power. And if you're going to walk it, start now. Stop defending yourself today, not because you're following advice, but because you've recognized that the person who defends himself has already lost, and you're no longer willing to lose. Subscribe if you're ready to continue this journey into the dark truths that society won't tell you. Subscribe if you're willing to do the work of killing your weak self and replacing it with something harder, colder, more powerful. Subscribe not for entertainment, but for transformation. Because every video on this channel is designed to strip away another layer of the comforting lies you've been told and expose the brutal realities that separate the powerful from the powerless. This isn't content for the masses. This is for those rare individuals willing to look into the mirror and see weakness, and then do the painful work of destroying it. If that's you, you know what to do.